Okay, let's do a watercolor value study. We're going to start with layering. And the way you do this is just to do several light layers so that it slowly builds up. So we're going to do one. This will be our lightest layer. It does need to be dry in between. Then once that dries, you're just going to add another layer, dry them together, and you're going to keep doing this so that as each layer gradually builds up on top of each dry layer, it gets darker and darker. This is great for things like corners, places where you want the value to have like hard edges. It works on not hard edges too, and it's especially good for thinking about how you layer for adding texture. Like you might want to do a light layer and then another layer on top that has like some texture to it, some movement. But this understanding of layering is foundational. Now let's think about adding value or going from light to dark in another way. This time we're going to do it gradually. So this is called a gradation. You won't have those hard edges. And the key here is to really preserve that light side. It's going to be very easy to make it too dark. So use your paper towel. You can blot off extra color. You can also blot off extra water if things are looking kind of blobby. You can also use your brush kind of like a mop. So dry off your brush on your paper towel and kind of mop off any extra. You can see I blow dried here in order to get another layer of darkness. It can only get so dark in one layer. That's why understanding layering is really important so that you can add those layers as you need, whether you want hard edges or soft edges. Okay, now let's think about making things lighter and darker. Watercolor is different. It's a transparent medium. So when you want something to be lighter, use water, use the transparency. You're letting the white of the paper kind of shine through to lighten it, and the water dilutes it. You can use white, but it's going to be chalkier and more matte, and that white can come through other layers as you layer other colors on top. It's not ideal. For making things darker, you can use black. It's an option, but it's going to tend to be a less interesting color, less rich. Black kind of flattens the color. If you use a complementary color, like orange in this case, because orange and blue are complements, you get a different kind of neutral. You get a richer, deeper neutral. Now, just like with the black, you might need to layer up more colors because, again, watercolor is a transparent medium, but the complementary colors will neutralize each other and make a more interesting neutral as opposed to just automatically adding black. So basically, with watercolor, use the transparency, try to stay away from black and white, use water, use complements. All right, now I want to show you how this complementary color thing works. But first, I want to cover up my mistake. I made a mistake here. I just cut out a piece of watercolor paper, glued it down, and I'm just going to pretend like nothing happened. That is fine in your sketchbook pages. We all do this. All right, this time I'm going to use yellow and purple complements. The reason I want to use yellow and purple is they're actually really different tonally. Purple is a lot darker than yellow. Yellow is really light. So for that reason, yellow actually works really well for like highlight and light areas, and purple works really well in your shadows. So as the purple and yellow meet each other in the middle here, you can see that it starts to get more kind of neutral, more kind of brown. That is exactly what we're looking for. Now, as far as getting it darker goes, again, this is watercolor, a transparent medium. You're going to need to layer it. So please make sure that that is how you're doing that. Okay, now let's try a real life example, something with hard edges and something more round. I'm going to start with a layer of yellow, and just like always, they need to be dry in between. I'm going to do one more layer for some of the areas that I want to be darker. So that first layer is like my highlights, the light areas. If the blow dryer gets stuff out of hand, just use your paper towel, take care of it. So now I have the yellow sections, and I'm going to start now with some purple, the complement of yellow, to neutralize it. It's getting browner. I'm going to try purple on these shadows, and at some point you're going to see here I'm going to overwork this. I want you to kind of see if you can tell where I started overworking it. Watercolor requires paying attention to when to stop because it's really hard to get that white paper back once it's gone. All right, so I've added some shadows, some purple shadows. I'm adding a darker layer. and it's starting to get too purple. So if it gets too much on one side and you want to bring it back to neutral, then you need to add the other color. So I'm going back with some yellow to make that neutral more solidly neutral. Now I'm using a small brush to kind of darken up that edge. And I think this is when things start getting a little too much. Sometimes the paper starts to sort of ball up, or you can just tell it looks kind of messy. If that's the case, my recommendation is to just stop. Take a minute. You can always go back to it and add more later, but you can't take it back once it's there. All right, now let's try a gradation. This is two colors mixing into each other. I have kind of a red. I accidentally used a couple of colors here. It's not a big deal. I'm just gonna kind of go with it and get that first layer dry. This is called negative painting. And the reason it's called that is because we're actually gonna paint the negative space, not the object. So I'm drawing these little ovals, and I'm actually not going to paint a single oval. Instead, I'm going to paint the space around the ovals. And this kind of mimics what we did with the first step with layering, where each one just gets a little bit darker. So take a look. You can try this with any shape. There are some examples online that you can use. You would search the term negative painting, but basically with each layer, I'm going to add in the background another shape, cover it up with a layer of paint, and then I'm just going to keep adding another layer of shapes behind. And as they get further away from us, we get another layer and another layer. At the end, I'll kind of use a small brush to sort of give shadows and definition around each shape. But other than that, it's really just an opportunity to sort of practice in a real world setting, like what could it look like to use layers with other objects that aren't that standard value scale. So enjoy, get your work done, and learn something in the process.